The winner of the Organising Award this year is Bella Fashola of RMT. And the winner of the Learning Rep Award this year is Catherine Williams from Unite. And our winner of the Young Members Award is Lewis Akers of NGSU. The final award is the Women's Gold Badge, and this year's recipient is Carol Sewell of Unison. Unfortunately, Carol can't be with us today, but I'm sure you'll join me in congratulating her, and we'll make sure that she gets her award safely. Thank you. I call paragraph 5.6. And colleagues, I'd now like to welcome this morning's keynote speaker, the leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer. At Labour's conference last month, Keir set out how a Labour government would deliver a new deal for working people, a vital part of Labour's plan to build a fairer, greener future. And this, of course, is in stark contrast to the chaos of the current government, which seems to get worse by the minute. We look forward to hearing more from Keir today about his vision and about how Labour will work with unions to support working people through the cost of living crisis and promote workers' and trade union rights. Keir, you're very welcome. I invite you to address Congress.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Congress. And it's a privilege to come and speak to you at such an important time. I have to say, with everything going on, I'm a bit nervous to turn my phone off for half an hour, 45 minutes. We really don't know what will have happened by the time we turn it back on. Can I just say, watching that video and hearing the words of the reps there was really moving, I think, a real reminder of the importance of the trade union movement. But look, before I go any further, I want to say thank you to the General Secretary, my friend, a giant of the Labour movement, Francis. On the side of workers, on the side of women, on the side of Arsenal, Francis is always on the right side. But Congress, especially during the pandemic, where her determination to fight for working people was an inspiration to all of us. Congress, never forget, it was Francis who led the employers and the government to the furlough scheme. A tripartite deal for those troubled times, a true collective agreement for the nation. Without her deal, 10 million workers would have been jobless during a monumental social crisis. And my Labour Party supported it every step of the way, including on the many occasions the government wanted to scrap it prematurely. We will never forget that leadership, Francis. Thank you for that. And thank you to Paul too. The organising you did to keep workers safe during the crisis saved countless lives. I know how much our movement is in your blood. I also know that you're an Everton fan. So as the TUC moves from red to blue, I look forward to working with you as Britain moves in the opposite direction. Congress, today I want to set out what's at stake for Britain. Because while politics is always about choices, the choice now is as stark as it gets. We face a battle for the soul of our country, who we are, who we're for. The Labour choice is a Britain that is fairer, greener and more dynamic. A Britain where we rebuild our public services to provide opportunity and security. Tackle the climate emergency head on. Use it to create jobs and industries of the future. Restore faith in politics as a force for good. Get Britain's hope, its confidence and its future back. But the first step, the foundation that all this rests on, is respect for the working people who create the wealth that drives our country forward. It's not just the privileged few who grow Britain's economy. The Tories are so wrong about that. It's the cleaners, carers, nurses, teachers, engineers, physios, scientists, shop workers, drivers, builders, bartenders, teaching assistants, technicians, cooks, warehouse workers, posties, farmers, small business owners. Who grows our economy? Who's growth for? The right choice, the only choice, the Labour choice, is working people. And my government will be dedicated to building an economy that works for working people. And everything else flows from this. And Britain knows exactly where the Tories stand. They can dance around a U-turn. They can sack this Chancellor or the Prime Minister. But the damage is done, and they did it. They crashed the British economy. And for what? To show they were on the side of the richest 1%. A crisis made in Downing Street, without a democratic mandate, paid for by working people in higher bills, higher rents and higher mortgages. This is who they are. These are their true colours. Never again can Britain take seriously their claim to be a party of aspiration or sound money. But Congress, last night in Parliament, even by their standards, a new chaotic low. All the failures of the past 12 years have now come to the boil. The victims of crime who can't get justice. People dying because ambulances can't get there in time. Millions going without food or heating. And none of it can drum into the Tories the idea that our country must come first. They lack the basic patriotic duty to keep the British people out of their own pathetic squabbles. And it's wrecked the finances of our country and for millions of people. This cannot continue. Britain deserves better. Britain cannot afford the chaos of the Conservatives anymore. We need a general election now. Congress, just look at their latest plan to get our country out of the hole that they dug. They turn to austerity. They turn to you, to your members and their rights. Congress, I'm sure you've heard that tape, how the Prime Minister thinks that working people lack skill and application. Heard her say that your members don't graft hard enough. It's delusional, it's insulting, but it comes with a warning. Because look around the country, a national emergency on the cost of living, public services on their knees, working people grafting every minute of the day, still unable to make ends meet. And ask yourself this, with that warped logic in charge, What happens when the Tories finally see the full reality of what they've done? I'll tell you. They'll lash out, double down, attack my party, our movement, and your members. So, Congress, let me stand here and spell this out. If they bring forward further restrictions on workers' rights or the right to strike, we will oppose and we will repeal. Conference, just as we will tear up anti-trade union legislation such as the Trade Union Act 2016. Absolutely. But we also need to be prepared, disciplined, relentlessly focused on the future. Meet their attacks with hope. Provide the leadership this country so desperately needs. And build a Britain where working people can succeed again, where working people are backed as the people who really create economic growth. That's the Labour choice. And that's not just words. I don't come from a privileged background. I grew up in a Pebble Dash semi in the 1970s. I remember what the anxiety of rising prices feels like. Remember when our phone was cut off because we couldn't pay the bill. And I know what that anxiety looks like now. Let me tell you about a care worker I know. She works 14-hour shifts, often overnight, never flinching at the relentless pressures put upon her. And every week, yes, every week, she struggles to make ends meet. Congress, that care worker, is my sister. And when I think about the work that she and millions like her did for our country during the pandemic, risking their health to save lives on low pay, low security contracts, and the Prime Minister says that the problem is people like my sister lack graft. Let me spell it out. The fight for fair pay, the fight for good work, the fight to make our economy work for everyone, not just a privileged few, is personal for me. And I will not rest until we see a Britain based on those values. That's the Labour choice. If you don't back people like my sister, don't be surprised if you get 12 years of stagnant growth. That's why we backed working people on rising energy prices. When the Prime Minister argued against handouts, Labour provided the clarity the nation needed. We said, this winter, not a penny more on anyone's bills, and we'd make sure the oil and gas companies pay their fair share. And I'll tell you something else, we'd abolish non-dom status to get our NHS back on its feet. That's the main barrier to capacity right now, staff. So we would invest in more doctors, more nurses, more health visitors. A tax break for some of our richest in our society, or a stronger NHS workforce. That is not a hard choice for us. But to end this cost of living crisis once and for all, we also need a long-term plan. A plan that will deliver cheaper bills and higher energy standards for working people, growth and jobs in all parts of the country, and real independence from tyrants like Putin, who weaponize fossil fuel exports and threaten our security. That's what our Green Prosperity Plan will achieve. 100% clean power by 2030. Investment in wind, solar, nuclear, hydrogen, green steel, and carbon capture. Training for plumbers, electricians, engineers, software designers, technicians, builders. A national sovereign wealth fund that generates growth and private investment. insulation for 19 million homes, and Great British Energy, a publicly owned company that takes advantage of the opportunities in clean British power and turns them into good, secure, high-paid British jobs. The argument for our plan is simple. Green energy is already cheaper than fossil fuels, 9 times cheaper. Working people need more of it. Britain needs to own it. And the jobs and growth we generate must be shared with every community. That's the Labour choice. It's why I've always said we'll fight the Tories on economic growth. The Prime Minister is completely out of touch with the reality of the British economy. She thinks workers' rights and collective bargaining are a barrier to growth. She doesn't care about the distribution of wealth in Britain. She hasn't U-turned on that. Now, it's a clear argument, I'll give her that. But it's one we've heard before. And it doesn't work. Working people will not be better off because we make the rich richer. It's pure dogma. The world has moved on from these discredited ideas. And every day the Tories stick to them is another nail in the coffin of Britain's economic credibility. Our real problem is we create too many jobs that are low paid and insecure. We lock too many communities out of the wealth that we create. And our public services aren't strong enough to help working people succeed. That's why we struggle to grow. Our economic foundations are too weak. And the Tory argument is, that's fine. If the City of London races ahead and the rest of Britain stagnates, they think that's okay. Congress, forget about lines on a graph. If you leave this many people behind, a nation will not grow fairly. You can't do it with low wages. You can't do it with insecure jobs and bad work. And you can't do it without a modern industrial strategy. This isn't a debate. The evidence is in. A vicious cycle of stagnation. That's how the now former Chancellor called it. And on this one thing, he was right. 12 years of Tory stagnation have left the average British family £8,800 poorer than other advanced economies. Economies like France, Germany, and the Netherlands. Economies that do have stronger collective bargaining, do have stronger workers' rights, do have a fairer share of wealth across their country. These things are not a barrier to growth or higher productivity. They go hand in hand with it. That's the Labour choice. So we will strengthen the role of trade unions in our society. And an economy that is strong for working people can't weaken the institutions that give working people strength. And it cannot be built on insecure foundations. Security at work is the bedrock for aspiration and opportunity, for giving people the confidence to get on. Nobody does their best if they're racked by fear about the future, if their contract gives them no protection to stand up for their rights at work, or if proper safety net doesn't support them in times of sickness and poor health. That's what Labour's New Deal for working people is all about. That's why we'll end fire and rehire, ban 0-hour contracts, extend parental leave, strengthen flexible working, better protection for pregnant women, mandatory reporting on ethnicity pay gaps, statutory sick pay for all, a single worker status, no more one-sided flexibility. And Congress, so far as I'm concerned, that's not just a list of rights. It's a statement of intent on social justice, on fairness, whose side we're on. more security for every worker in our country, and because of that, a stronger foundation for working people to aspire and get on. That's the economic dynamism Britain needs. That's how you get growth. That's the Labour choice. A choice that provides the basis for true social partnerships. A modern industrial strategy where we unite to tackle the country's challenges on behalf of working people. I will say this here. I'm not just pro-business. I want to partner with business to drive Britain forward. And I'll say the same about trade unions to the CBI. You saw the deal Francis struck during the pandemic. The results speak for themselves. It's a model Mark Drakeford had used successfully in Wales. And it can work because the vast majority of business leaders don't buy into the Tory trickle-down fantasy. They're not knocking on my door saying they want to rip up employee rights. They don't tell me the problems that they face will be solved by corporation tax cuts. They want fair taxes, high skills, and the long-term stability to invest. We can work with that. We will work with that. We'll set up a new Industrial Strategy Council, a permanent part of the landscape that brings in the creative genius of science in our universities, holds us to account on our decisions, helps businesses to innovate and grow, and delivers a real partnership between government, business, and unions. This is how we can give Britain the stability it needs for higher investment. A long-term plan, not a short-term fix. That's the Labour choice. But when we talk about economic stability, I want to be frank. The damage the Tories have done to our finances and our public services mean things are going to be really tough, now and during my Labour government. We cannot take any risks with the public finances. We have to restore economic stability, be the party of sound money. You've all seen the damage that can be done from fiscal irresponsibility. When you lose control of the economy, as the Tories have done, you lose the ability to do anything. And working people pay the price. That will not happen with Labour. I will not let it. It doesn't mean we have to take a back seat on fair pay. Low pay is the biggest barrier to a fairer, more dynamic Britain, bar none. A huge drag on our prospects for growth and social justice. We need a minimum wage that reflects the cost of living. And with a Labour government, that is exactly what Britain will get. But we will go further, because ending low pay in Britain isn't just a question of law, it's not just about the rules the state sets, it's about the power working people have to shape the rules that govern their lives. So my Labour government will end the Tory race to the bottom on pay with fair pay agreements. Agreements that will make work pay for the people who create Britain's economic growth. Just think how this would work in social care, a sector where 500,000 workers are paid less than £10 an hour, where people have to work multiple jobs and still struggle to provide for their family. With our fair pay agreements, social care employers and unions will have to get around the table and negotiate. And the deal they strike will set the floor for every social care employer in the country. That's how you make work pay fairly. That's how you improve conditions and raise the status of care work. Respect the workers who saved countless lives in the pandemic and create this country's wealth. Good work, fair pay, respect. That's the Labour choice. It's what both of us fight for, party and movement. But we must fight in different ways. Must accept that when it comes to delivering for working people, we have different jobs. I support the right to strike unequivocally. I understand it's always a last resort. The Tory idea that working people give up their wages lightly in the worst cost of living crisis for a century is completely unserious about the pain people feel right now. You're representing the democratic choice of your members. You're doing your job, and I respect that. But my job is different. The single most important thing I can do for working people is to make sure we win the next election and get a Labour government. That is how we roll out our Green Prosperity Plan, how we deliver the New Deal for working people, how we create a modern industrial strategy together. None of this happens unless Labour is in power. So I will never be ashamed to say my Labour Party wants to increase worker power in our economy. But nor will I apologise for approaching questions on industrial action as a potential Labour government. The Labour Party is not doing its job when it's in opposition. I will not let this be an era of Tory chaos, stagnation, attacks on working people. We can't go on any longer. This can't be a rerun of the 1980s. That's what they want. Liz Truss has torn away the veil. They're not even pretending anymore. The battle is here. A battle where all the usual signs of Tory decay, crumbling public services, the run on the pound, the question about how we keep the lights on, and the brutal hit to living standards of pensioners, families, and the poorest in our society will be turned back on us. The Congress, have no doubt about what's coming. Take nothing for granted. This winter will be brutal. We must do everything we can to look after people. But the Tories will not give up on power. That's not who they are. Our country is crying out for decisive leadership, and Labour will provide it. We will work every day to earn the trust of the British people, meet their ambitions for real change, walk towards a better future, and put this Tory trickle-down nonsense back in its box once and for all. That's the choice for Britain. A Tory party that's lost control of itself and the economy, or a Labour government that delivers fair pay, good work, and prosperity for all. A country where aspiration is rewarded, a clean energy superpower, a fairer, greener, more dynamic Britain, where working people get their rights, respect, and security that they deserve. That's the Labour choice. Thank you, Congress. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Congress. Thank you, Congress. Thank you.
Thank you, Keir. That was a wonderful speech, and know that you have the full support of the trade union movement. I'd now like to call delegates to put their questions to Keir. I'm going to call you in threes to ask your questions, and when we've heard the three questions, we'll hand over to Keir to respond. So we'll start with calling Sam Hemraj from Unison, Mandy Naylor from Usdaw, and Bella Fashola from RMT.
Good morning, Keir. Good morning, Conference.
Sam.
Public service workers, including those of us in the NHS, are bearing the brunt of Tory austerity, not least with the hit on our pay packets. By the end of October, NHS key workers across the UK will be deciding if they will be striking for better pay and staffing this winter. Labour in opposition has shown its support for public services, but what will Labour do in power to ensure that in future our members in the NHS and other public services receive pay awards that are at least in line with inflation? Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
Morning, Keir.
Hi, Mandy.
From Ulster Trade Union. Our question is, Ulster survey data shows that 1 in 4 universal credit claimants are missing meals every month just to pay the bills, with 1 in 5 having to rely on food banks. Low-paid workers have been failed by universal credit under the Tory austerity programme. The system is not fit for purpose and has not been structured in a way that supports low-paid workers. How will the Labour Party put pressure on the Tories to increase all benefits in line with inflation, and what plans does the Labour Party have to work with trade unions and to deliver a social security system which provides an adequate safety net for the country? Thank you.
Thank you, Mandy.
Hello, Keir. Bella Fashola, RMT Union. Firstly, can I thank you for all you did working with the RMT to fight the P&O sackings and support our seafaring colleagues. I myself am a railway cleaner and my job is outsourced to a company called Churchill's. Because we are outsourced, we get worse conditions of employment, and outsourced workers are overwhelmingly BAME and women workers. Will you promise to stick to your new deal for workers so that thousands of outsourced public transport workers like myself can be brought back in-house?
Thank you, Bella. Let me deal with those three, starting with the NHS and the question that Sam put to me. Firstly, just let me say thank you to all of those who work in our NHS and all our public services for everything they do every day, particularly during the pandemic. Congress, as you probably know, my wife works in the NHS, my mum worked in the NHS, my sister worked in the NHS, and my wife's mother worked in the NHS. So it runs through my body like my DNA. And we know that it's not just the strain of the last few years, there's 12 years worth of strain in that. Now, what will we be able to do in power? The first thing is to broaden the remit of the pay review bodies to put additional emphasis on pay, reflecting the need for improved recruitment and retention. But we also need to grow our economy, and that's why what I said in my speech and what we said at conference is really important, because we intend to abolish non-doms and to use that money to double the number going into our medical schools, etc., to build up our public services, to make that choice. But thirdly, what we've got to do is to tackle inflation, because the cost of living crisis is going to go on for some time if we don't get inflation under control. And that's why our energy package was so important. And making sure that we answer the question, if you're going to freeze people's bills, who pays for that? And it's got to be a fair share from the excess profit of the oil and wind companies. And it's really hard to believe that Liz Truss is really saying that we're going to freeze energy bills for 6 months, but she's not going to ask the oil and gas companies who made profits they didn't expect to make to pay anything towards it. She's going to put it on the never never, which means your members will pay for it in additional taxes for years and years to come. So, Sam, we've got a big programme for public services when we get into government, and I look forward to working with you to take that forward. Mandy, on benefits in line with inflation, the first thing is the statistics that you just quoted are absolutely awful in terms of the number of people in real poverty now. We have to take this on. We believe that benefits should go up in line with inflation. And the government used to believe that until a few days ago. So we will, in the short term, we will work with Tory MPs who feel strongly about this to make sure that we put up a united opposition in Parliament to what the government is proposing. In the longer term, I do think that we need to reform aspects of our benefit system where they're not working, and I know Jonathan Ashworth is already starting work with the trade unions on that, and we'll continue to do so. But I mean, there is one final point, Mandy, I would make, which is we do have to ask ourselves, this goes back to my argument on growth and pay, we do have to ask ourselves why in this country we have so many working people who are also reliant on benefits because they simply aren't paid enough money. That is shocking, and that's why we need to grow the economy, have secure, well-paid jobs for so many millions of people who are struggling just at the moment. Bella, on the questions of the New Deal for workers and P&O. Firstly, thank you for everything that you and the union and trade unions did generally in relation to that P&O dispute. I met a number of those who lost their jobs in that disgraceful action by P&O. They came to see me, they talked me through. They had years and years and years of experience in the job that they did. And when they came to see me, they were extremely concerned about the loss of their job, what it meant for them, their family and their community. But I'll tell you what their main concern was, that the boat or ship that they'd been working on wouldn't be safe. That was what they talked to me around the table about. That was their concern, that they were being replaced by inexperienced people and it would put those on the boats and ships at sea in danger. And that was the motivation for them. It was really fantastic to meet them. But it shows you why we need the New Deal for workers. And we are absolutely committed to that, Bella. We've got it drafted. We had it at a conference last year and we're committed to implementing it within the first 100 days of the next Labour government. So thank you very much for that question.
I now call Taj Salam from
Taj.
Unite, Carol Robertson from GMB and Gary Elliott from Nautilus.
Hi, Keir. Taj Salam. Unite the Union. I'm a bus driver and a Unite branch secretary. Unite has won 64 bus strikes in the last year after profitable employers initially refused to pay decent pay rises. Do you agree that when profitable employers with ability to pay try to impose pay cuts on workers, those workers are right to take industrial action?
Carol Robertson from the GMB.
Hi, Carol.
My sons are looking for work and one of the few local employers is Amazon. I am extremely concerned for their safety if they do have to work there. There are very real accounts of oppressive pick rates, too short break times, injuries and a culture of surveillance and job insecurity. No employer in this day and age should be treating workers this way. Will Labour promise to deny Amazon any public sector contracts, including for Amazon Web Services, until it has sorted out its appalling health and safety record and ended its aggressive hostility to trade unions?
Good morning, Gary Elliott.
Hi, Gary.
Hi, Nautilus International, the Seafarers Union. In March, 786 British seafarers were unlawfully dismissed by P&O ferries without consultation or notice. P&O ferries factored into the cost of breaking the law when they decided to sack almost their entire British crew. Had a coincidence from what you just said about the Dutch, they never sacked one Dutch seafarer because of their employment rights, which are far stronger than the UK. Additionally, UK law does not provide for conjunctive relief. Would the Labour government put that right?
Thank you. Thank you. Let me deal with those. Taj, firstly, let me thank bus drivers for everything they do, particularly during the pandemic. I met the daughter of Ranjith, who you will remember was the bus driver who died from COVID, from doing his job as a bus driver. So I know firsthand just how hard that was during the pandemic. And when it comes to industrial action, obviously that's an incredible record for Unite in terms of the strikes and the negotiations and what they've won for their members, and quite right too. We have to understand the suffering of so many people whose wages haven't gone up for a very, very long time and prices are going through the roof and they can't make ends meet. And that's why that action is taken, and that's the role of trade unions to take on that action. And I support the right to strike. I do think that there's much more we can do when it comes to bus services and bus drivers. I was with our Metro mayors, Andy in Manchester, Steve up in Liverpool, and Tracy Brabin now in West Yorkshire. And what they're driving towards when it comes to buses is this idea of a flat fare plus control over the routes that are used for buses. And I think that's the sort of thing that an incoming Labour government can absolutely push forward, not just where we've got Metro mayors, but across the whole of the country. So thank you, Taj, for that. Carol, in relation to Amazon, firstly, I'm really concerned by the issues that GMB have raised in relation to Amazon, some of which you mentioned in your question, but there are plenty of other examples. I do think it's the role of government to drive up standards. I don't think government should just get out of the way. It's the role of government to do so. That's why our new deal for working people is so important. Day one rights for every worker, whatever their status. That would make a huge difference when it comes to Amazon. I do think there's other things an incoming Labour government can do. There's a lot of procurement, and it's up to a government to put terms and conditions and a framework around procurement to make it clear the standards we would expect if public money is going to be expended on any business, whether it's Amazon or anybody else. But I would say this, Carol, I'd be very clear to you and to Amazon, they should recognise the GMB and have a unionised workforce. It's as simple as that. And Gary, on P&O, obviously I've said one or two things about it before. What really frustrated all of us in relation to that appalling series of sackings was that the provision in the law they used to do it was pointed out as a gap 2 years before they did it. The government knew there was a gap. They knew they had to close that gap. They didn't do it, and P&O sailed right through it. And the government's done nothing about it. We would take that on, we would change that law, close that gap, and put it with our package of employment rights within the first 100 days of a Labour government. That was absolutely disgraceful what they did. It was flagged to the government did nothing, and P&O then took advantage of that. We cannot allow that to happen again, and the comparison with other countries is very, very valid. So thank you for that question.
Keir, thanks very much for taking the time to answer those questions. Just before we let you go, I'm going to abuse the chair because, as you might expect, we had lots of other questions from unions. So many of our public sector unions are dealing with the consequences of vicious cuts, unsafe staffing levels and real terms pay cuts. University lecturers, civil servants, teachers, early years workers, health workers and others, all in the midst of industrial action ballots or considering action. And of course, some, like the POA members in England, are even denied the basic right to industrial action, even though their colleagues in Scotland can take industrial action. So what would a future Labour government do to invest in our public services and heal the relationship between politicians and hard-working public servants who feel they just can't take anymore? How do we rebuild our public services?
Well, Sue, thank you for that question. And as most people here will know, I ran a public service for 5 years with 7,000 staff. And I know what it means to be a public servant, because it means you go to work, you work hard, and you have that public service ethos that goes with it, always doing the extra work. And it breaks my heart to see what's happened to our public services over the last 10 years. I saw what austerity did 10 years ago. We cannot do it again. We cannot take cuts to our public services. And this is a fight we'll have to have before we get into government, I fear, because that's exactly where this government is going to go, and we will resist it every step of the way. And with public services, particularly the NHS, I often say, they're on their knees. A lot of people working in public services say, no, Keir, they're actually down on their face now. It's that bad. So we have to make it a mission of the next Labour government to rebuild our public services. It goes with growth. And the idea that you can either have growth, economic growth, or public services is completely wrong. You can't have growth without public services, and vice versa. We have to see them as one part of the same argument, how we build a better economy that works for working people and how we build a better Britain for the future. So that's what we will do, a national mission to rebuild our public services. And I look forward to working with you and all the trade unions in this room as we go down that path to rebuild our public service. It'll be one of the best things that the next Labour government can achieve. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Congress.
Thank you, Keir. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in Downing Street. Congress, we now return to section 3 of the General Council report, Good Services, the section on justice on page 35. I call motion 61, defending the integrity of the justice system. The General Counsel support the motion. It will be moved by NAPO and seconded by the POA.
Yes, good morning, Congress. Ian Lawrence, General Secretary. NAPO, moving motion 61. Well, look, we should have